Hello and welcome to another edition of Indie Thinking here at Indie Agency News. I am Kyle O'Brien, managing editor here at Indie Agency News. And today we are talking with our friends at Partners in Napier. We're going to be talking about National Women's Checkup Day for Maimonides Health. Maimonides Health. Let me say that correctly. I hope I did. We're going to bring in Gretchen Bye, creative director at Partners in Napier, to talk about this. So hi, Gretchen. How are you?
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Well, it's fantastic you're here and talking about this. So let's get right down to it. Talk a bit about the brief, what they came to you with, and how did you approach it?
So, the thing about Brooklyn is it's a real vibe, and authenticity with Brooklynites are everything. And they'll call you out on your BS. So we had to look at healthcare through, what is that point of differentiation for them, right? So looking at through that lens with a voice of the neighborhood, and really using that lens to talk to people in the community and using their individuality to connect. So the women's healthcare was an extension of that campaign.
Gotcha. Okay, so talk about the process, how this developed. Creating the work. What did you learn from the process? What were some of the specifics, and maybe some of the challenges too? Just walk me through the whole thing.
So it didn't start out as like a women's healthcare brief. There were several different service lines that needed our attention. So we started out identifying the service lines. One was the NICU. We had OBGYN, women's health, and breast cancer. So the bucket was really big, and it was a huge net to cast into like one thing. So we focused on labor and delivery and the breast center.
Okay. How did that come about, and what was what lessons did you learn along the way in terms of doing this?
There was so many things, and as a woman who has health and healthcare to deal with on her own, it was something I never thought about being a mother, that birth is really unpredictable. So we, the whole strategy around MIMO being Brooklyn and connecting it in that way. But women, giving birth had a whole nother challenge. It's like chasing the weather. And I think I speak for all mothers when I say, none of us really want a photo shoot of ourselves, pushing a watermelon out of a keyhole, or even the moment after when we're like half naked and sweaty and exhausted. So, we leveraged stock imagery, rights, managed due to not being able to kind of plan around the birthing of babies, and that vulnerability as a strategic choice. I think the other thing we did too, when it came to a learning, is that women just aren't prioritizing their health, particularly women in underserved communities. So we had to make it very accessible and attainable. Like, for example, we do some shooting in the hospital and we do some shooting in the neighborhoods. So, for example, as if going to, for a mammogram isn't weird enough, don't make it weirder by, showing me the machine where it's going to happen. It doesn't feel ownable. Right. So, when you get that call from your doctor that's like, hey, you might have to come in for a rescan, you're probably getting that on the way to the farmer's market or at the gas station. So a lot of the imagery we showed was having those conversations in their neighborhood. So it didn't feel so, in their community. So it didn't feel so abstract and more relatable.
Gotcha. And Brooklyn, what communities were you in multiple neighborhoods? What?
All of Brooklyn, pretty much.
Yeah. Pretty big borough. So
yeah.
You definitely got around. So, talk about working with the client on this. How did you help sell the ideas? What was the back and forth between the client and yourself on making the successful?
I think one of the things we noticed in such a saturated market is that, we were up against these behemoth healthcare institutions. We were up against Presbyterian and NYU Langone, and, we could not outspend them. And what we leaned into was, in such a saturated market, it seemed as though these healthcare institutions are sort of just talking to each other, kind of one-upping each other, instead of speaking to the women, the people, the community that actually needs them. And I think we leaned into sort of, that honesty and that tone of how women want to be spoken to and how Brooklynites want to be spoken to. So we didn't want to make it scarier, again, by showing stats and machinery, that I have to put my body into. And we didn't want to be talked down to either. So, we did it with a dash of emotional intelligence and an ownable, Brooklyn vibe, and, a little bit of bedside manner didn't hurt either. So when we say things like, in our labor and delivery campaign, there's so many unknowns. It's the Wild West. We're excited. We're freaked out. I need to know what you're doing, what I'm getting myself into. So, in this case, we say, welcome to Brooklyn over 6,000 times a year. So that's the way that we can talk about the pride of Brooklyn and the pride of being a new mother in a way that feels, really special and ownable to Maimonides.
Sure. I mean, you talked a bit about, the importance of women's health. What has this kind of taught you about, women's health in general, not just for this client, but in terms of how you can speak, to people in plain language that they understand, that's not going to scare them?
I think, healthcare is so personal, and especially for women, it's so emotionally tied. And, with the breast center and the birthing unit and the NICU, there's so much fear and uncertainty. And we have a responsibility to make that feel accessible and relatable. And I think too, like for women in advertising, we're either like treated like martyrs, right? Women who puts off our own, care to take care of others, or we have to kind of be the hero, like, and there's sort of this weird inequity at play, but it's not all bad, that oversimplification is I think, kind of easy and sometimes lazy, but there's a power in being a woman and the burden of the one who is needed the most and uses her body to make life and all, those scary things that come with it throughout the entire arc of being a woman. So, I think there's a truth in between that martyrdom piece that I think a lot of people, a lot of advertisers use to talk to women, and the sort of you can have it all thing that is that's the tension that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, how do you kind of work with that tension though? Because I mean, you do have, you go from the eras of thinking about women in the workplace, and you had the working girl, power suits. Then you had the teal shoulder pads of empowerment. Then you have kind of the girl boss culture, but then there's always been this burden of how do you balance it all? And I mean, how do you balance all those parts of being a woman and trying to take care of your own health without letting go of your power?
It's interesting because I have a lot of younger, I've been doing this a long time, women in our industry that say like, how do you work in advertising and have kids and, take care of yourself? And I'm like, I don't. My goal is to break even, right? I have days where I'm a great mother and I'm taking care of my health and I'm like pretty okay at work. And I have days that I'm a great creative director and not taking care of my body that day, or, and I think it's a balance of at the end of the week or month, you just want to break even. But I think at the end of the day, like no matter who we're marketing to, but especially women in this case, what really grinds my gears is when brands confuse information for intimacy. And there is nothing more intimate than your health and your body. And so I think one of the challenges is to normalize these conversations. And it's very challenging to talk to a client out of the safety of talking to a consumer with stats and RTBs. It's super safe. No one's going to get fired for doing that. No marketing manager is going to get fired for doing that, but it's not real and it's not interesting. And I think it's relatively forgettable.
Right. I mean, there are so many tropes and especially in women's healthcare, but they're all over the place. I mean, CPG, skincare, household goods in
Yeah.
the healthcare. How do you deal with that? What are some themes that like shouldn't be touched on? What are some themes that you see far too often that you kind of go, okay, let's stop those?
I think making assumptions is huge. One of the brands I worked on two of the least sexy accounts in our agency at one point at the same time. One was cottage cheese, marketed to women, of course, because that's of course what we love to eat, and Scar Cream and Stretch Mark Cream. Okay, so it was like a pharmaceutical brand, and then like a grocery brand. So
You had all the glamour.
yeah, it was sexy. So, one of the things we did with let's talk about Scar Cream. We found that women had very polarizing feelings about their scars, right? And so they either wore them like a badge of honor from like childbirth or beating a cancer scare or a survival story. And or there was women with scars that was a reminder of something really, scary and painful. But either way, women wanted them to be less noticeable. But we pushed into those real feelings, that tension behind, this asterisk on themselves. So I think the tension and duality, which is, you could say that we all have that as women, are what made these campaigns really exciting. And I think being polarizing and self-aware enough to own that is really refreshing and honest. And I think brands that are self-aware make people trust them. So
No, that's great, man. I mean, being self-aware, that's I mean, isn't that kind of half the battle if you're kind of putting on a front, which let's be honest, a lot of healthcare marketing does. They puts on a front, you see all the people jumping around being super, super happy, even though they have the worst case of eczema in their life. But I mean,
I'm going to be fine.
Yeah, exactly. You know what you don't see in that? People scratching. But I mean,
right, exactly.
But you're saying, that kind of balance is like, you need to be able to balance that realness without scaring them. And that's got to be, a really difficult thing to do.
It is. And even for cottage cheese, I mean, you wouldn't think of cottage cheese as a brand that you wanted to make self-aware, but we learned when we were digging into the strategy that cottage cheese is one of the three most polarizing foods in the US. It's up there with like cilantro and liver, but the people that loved it in this cult-like way. And then there were people that it literally made them dry heave. So we weren't trying to like change people's minds. We leaned into that tension of this ridiculous love-hate relationship that people were having with this product. It was crazy and it was real. And, when you have clients that can own their self-awareness, whether it's, the fear of just going for a checkup, or I can't make time for myself, or, it's what moves the needle. I mean, I'll quote Maya Angelou. She said, and I'm going to probably mess up the quote, but she said, people don't remember what you say. They remember how you make them feel.
Right.
And you can't move the needle unless to have somebody like, look, our job is to make somebody do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do. You can't do that without making them feel something.
Right. But God, you brought up cilantro. That's
do you hate it or do you love it?
I love it. I absolutely love it. But my dad hated it. He thought it was like eating soap. And so I can imagine. I mean, I've never actually seen a campaign for cilantro, but I can imagine, hey, if it tastes like soap, don't eat it.
We're not for you.
Yeah. Not for everybody, and definitely not for those people who have that genetic disposition not to like it. So
right.
That's interesting.
And there's no shame in not liking it. And there's no shame in not wanting to have a mammogram either. But the difference is with women's health is that we need to normalize, we need to like make that feel like something that they should do, and without any more guilt than we already have in our lives.
Yeah. Well, it's an important message to get out there. So as we kind of wrap things up here, what kind of mindset do you wish every brand would adopt before launching a campaign aimed at women, and not necessarily in the healthcare space, but just women in general? And I mean, you can be specific to healthcare, sure.
We're people. We need an advocate.
Yep.
And I think that we are emotionally driven, probably more than, say, if I'm selling, snow tires to truck drivers. It's owning the authenticity of what your point of differentiation is and explaining that in a way that is not pandery or makes me feel like I have to do one other thing. Make it easy, make it safe, explain it, and trust us to know what we're doing.
Yeah. Explain it, without talking down, without, because there is that sense of pandering when you're marketing to women. And I think you just wrapped it up perfectly, is that talk to us and expect that we know the best of what's best for us, but guide us, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
We're talking to each other. I mean, you want to talk about, like, even before, influencers and social media, women we tribe up and we talk about stuff. So, be part of our conversation.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. And anything else you want to say, either about the campaign or advice on kind of marketing to women that we didn't get out?
I think the hill I'm going to die on is not confusing intimacy for information. If we can get our clients to just make their RTBs work in a way that does not upstage your message and who you are, I think that is the biggest, like, my biggest challenge.
Totally understood. Well, Gretchen Bye, thank you so much, Creative Director at Partners in Napier. Thank you so much for sharing the work with us. Let's take a look at it one more time. Here it is, and I'll just scroll through to the second one. Great message for new mothers, expectant mothers, and especially those in Brooklyn. I love the work. It's great. Thank you so much for sharing it with us, and please stay on. We're going to end the recording, but that doesn't mean you're going away. So thanks to everyone for listening. This has been Indie Thinking. Kyle O'Brien, Managing Editor, Indie Agency News. Gretchen Bye, Creative Director at Partners in Napier. Thank you so much. Everybody have a good day.